everyone who does not understand Ukrainian. There is opportunity for you to join translation into English.
Choose interpretation into English. So press the button interpretation on the menu and choose English so that you can follow the translation into English. Якщо ви випадково є на
interpretation and select Ukrainian.
Okay. Я тоді хочу привітати.
Now I want to most heartily welcome you all in our event. I am Pavlo Smytsnyuk and I am director of the Institute for Ecumenical Studies at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. Let me welcome all of you on behalf of our institute and also on behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Together with this foundation, we launched this tiny project dedicated to peace building. That's why I beforehand already expressed my gratitude to this foundation and especially their office based in Kharkiv for supporting this initiative of ours. This series of webinars that we started this year in summer, everyone who does not speak at the moment, please switch off your mics to avoid this echo. Could you please switch off your phones, everyone who is not speaking at the moment? Thank you very much. Our project of webinars is called Lessons for Ukraine. The main aim is to have a closer look at how other countries, other contexts, and other churches dealt with conflicts. Ukraine is currently dealing with conflicts, conflict with Russia, conflict between different social and social-political groups, and we can even say to some extent a minor religious conflict between two Orthodox churches. And we would like to see how other countries, other contexts lived in similar conflicts and somehow we're dealing with those. We don't mean there is echo coming through. I can hear some kind of echo. Can our technical support help us to get rid of this? Thank you. Thank you. Thus, we don't want to necessarily learn from all the lessons borrowed from other countries, but we want to have a closer look at how they were dealing with these conflicts. And maybe we may come across some useful and interesting insights applicable for Ukraine. We call this approach of ours defamiliarization. We want to get aside from our conflict, to look at it from aside, from afar, by looking at other conflicts through the prism of other contexts, other approaches. Today, we are going to talk about Polish-German reconciliation. The next 4 webinars, we will be moving away from Ukraine. We will go to the Balkans. We will go to the Northern Ireland, to Lebanon. We will have a look at the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. And this way, in this Mediterranean, European, Middle East context, we will try to seek some answers. but we start from the closest reconciliation, Polish-German. It was interesting for us as an Institute of Ecumenical Studies that an interconfessional aspect was very clearly manifested here. On the one hand, Catholic churches, on the other hand, Lutheran churches in both countries, both in Germany and in Poland, were involved into this process. And sometimes they were playing a role of initiators for reconciliation. I think in this respect, perhaps more than in other cases we are going to consider, ecumenical reconciliation and interstate reconciliation were walking hand in hand. I think what we will hear today from our speakers will be of special interest. To save time, I would like to introduce our today's speaker and respondent. Our speaker is Professor and habilitated Dr. Piotr Kopiec. Piotr Kopiec is lecturer in the section of Ecumenism at the Institute of Catholic Theology at Catholic University in Lublin. Piotr was working with projects pertaining to Polish-German reconciliation, and with a number of threads. Piotr is connected with Ukraine. I will not now specify, but he is also well aware of what's going on in Ukraine, and he is interested in Ukrainian-Polish reconciliation. Perhaps he will not be speaking about this today, but we already know that the things he's going to tell us about Polish-German reconciliation will have some little bell ringing to Ukraine as well. His respondent to Piotr's report will be Bishop Pavlo Schwartz. Bishop Pavlo is a bishop of German Evangelical Lutheran Church in Ukraine. The title of the denomination unites him with Germany, of course, but he did study in Poland, so he also knows both contexts. German Evangelic Lutheran Church in Ukraine is not of big scale, but it's active, and it's active on the ecumenical level and on the level of the National Council of Churches. And it participates in the project of reconciliation, where Greek Catholic Church is also part of, and they belong to many ecumenical projects. Recently, Bishop Pavlo, with a delegation of Lutheran and Reformed Church pastors, visited Lviv, Ukrainian Catholic University, and our institute in particular. So we are grateful for his agreement to be a respondent for today's evening. So I pass the floor now to Piotr Kopiec, and I wish everyone a fruitful follow-up discussion.
Interpretation and choose English from the list. Thank you. Otrze, mam słowo. Profesor Kopiec.
I'm sorry. Okay. Tak, duże dziękuję za zaproszenie.
Thank you very much for this invitation, for this opportunity to meet and to speak about this difficult topic.
About the presentation, because I would like to share and to use the PowerPoint presentations. So I will share the screen, and I ask you if
you are co-host now, so you can in theory be able to share your screen.
Okay, just a second.
Yes, we can see. Wonderful.
Oh, amazing. Okay, so now the title Ecumenism in Poland and the Ecumenical Contribution to the Polish-German Reconciliation. So the title consists of two components: Ecumenism in Poland, then Ecumenical Contribution to the Polish-German Reconciliation. It means that now I would like to present Ecumenism in Poland as a large context for this next topic, so the contribution of the churches to the Polish-German reconciliation. The plan of the presentation, according to the title. So firstly, and I would like to outline also very briefly history and topography of the ecumenism in Poland. And here I would like to distinguish between the history of the Polish Ecumenical Council and then the Commission for Ecumenism of the Polish Bishops' Conference. It means non-Catholic contribution to non-Catholic churches' contribution to ecumenism in Poland, and then Catholic contribution to the ecumenism in Poland. This distinction and such a division seems to be relevant if we consider the inter-confessional situation in Poland as obviously consisting of two, let's say, branches of Christianity, non-Catholic and Catholic. This is, of course, impact and result of the majority of Catholics in Poland. Second point of the presentation, I would like also briefly present the achievements of the Polish ecumenism, so the most important achievements, and then concluding ecumenical contribution to the Polish-German reconciliation. So this contribution and the reconciliation are somehow contextualized within the situation of the Polish ecumenism. Now, so the point one, an outline, historical and structural outline of the ecumenism in Poland. First, we have to assume, or we have to say that ecumenism in Poland, or the ecumenical tradition, has a long history, a deep historical tradition also. This is something tradition without stake and the golden age of Polish tolerance in the 16th century. And this is also a heritage of philosophical and theological writings of such authors like Andrzej Frycz-Modrzewski or Stanisław Orzechowski. Nevertheless, the first sign of ecumenical cooperation in Poland emerged, of course, in the 20th century, and it was the Polish chapter of the World Alliance for International Friendship through the Churches. So the Polish chapter was established in 1923. Then this chapter and this alliance stopped because of various conflicts within the Polish or within the Polish Protestantism. The conflicts were, of course, mostly of national character. Then the atrocities of the war and horrific persecutions of priests of various confessions committed by both occupants, both German Nazi state and the Soviet Union, also influenced the high degree interconfessional relationships in Poland. And these difficulties and also these atrocities were somehow symbolized by Juliusz Bursze, of whom pictures you could see on the presentation. Bursze was a bishop of the Evangelical Augsburg Church in Poland, and his history was that despite the German origin, he was an opponent of Nazi state, Nazi Germany, and immediately after the German invasion in Poland, he was arrested by the Nazi authorities, tortured and sent to the concentration camp in Sachsenhausen, where he died. But on the other hand, the wartime is also the time of preparatory periods, or period, better to say, for the future Polish Ecumenical Council. At the end of the 1942 in Warsaw, members of various non-Catholic churches met and established so-called transitional ecumenical council. They were also another important fact during the wartime, namely in March 1944, in the Methodist Chapel in Warsaw, clergy from the Evangelical, Lutheran, Evangelical Reformed, Methodist, Old Catholic, Maronite, and the Polish National Catholic churches signed so-called Polish Confession, the Creed of Polish Christians. It was the dogmatic document which considers different theological principles regarded as a common good for these churches. Also, this outset of the Polish Ecumenism, and especially of the Polish Ecumenical Council, in October 1945, clergy members from 5 Protestant churches in Poland established the body of name the Council of Protestant Churches in Poland. And finally, in 15 November 1946, that was the date of establishing the Polish Ecumenical Council. The founding act has been signed by 46 delegates who represented 12 confessional traditions from different Protestant, Orthodox, and Old Catholic branches or traditions. The council declared itself as the community of churches which cares about the spiritual atmosphere of the Christian unity according to the Archpriest's prayer of Jesus Christ, may they all be one. Now, in the opinion of historians, one can distinguish 2 periods in the history of the Polish Ecumenical Council. First, it was the period since the outset till 1957, when the Council was initiating ecumenical movement in Poland, but without official participation of the Roman Catholic Church. The Council attempted to proliferate ecumenical idea through various initiatives, like, for instance, the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, ecumenical worships, or ecumenical Bible weeks, or theological conferences, for instance, concerning Catholic and Protestant teaching and Eucharist. The Council also unfolded its structure by developing and constituting regional ecumenical councils, or sub-chapters of the Council. But on the other hand, the last years of this period, of this first period, were marked by deepening crises, especially due to the communist persecutions and internal conflicts. The second period, so the period from 1957 onwards, lasts and marks the second period, which lasts till today. The turning point was when the Polish Ecumenical Council is given affiliated council status with the World Council of Churches. In 1958, the communist state authorities approved the council statute and the name the Polish Ecumenical Council. This name was officially accepted in 1958. Due to many factors, this we could emblem of the Polish Ecumenical Council, of course, with the labor addressed to the World Council of Churches. Then we have the member churches of the Polish Ecumenical Council in the time of its establishing. Then we have the part of the constitution of the Polish Ecumenical Council. Okay, then due to many factors, the number of member churches constituting the Polish Ecumenical Council was changing. And for instance, in 1963, the Orthodox Church returned to the Council, but in 1988, United Evangelical Church seceded from the works of the organization, also due to many internal conflicts. But I think there is no point to enter into more details history of particular churches constituting the council. Now the Polish Ecumenical Council currently affiliated 7 member churches. So I will back for a while to this slide. The Church of Christian Baptists in the Republic of Poland, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in the Republic of Poland, Evangelical Methodist Church, Evangelical Reformed Church, Polish Catholic Church, Old Catholic Marian Church, and the Polish Autocephalous Orthodox Church. Churches having legal entity status and teaching that they confess faith. Yes,
Piotr, we can't see the text in its entirety on the slides. So would you mind trying to maybe close it and reopen it?
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Just a second. So I have to stop share and then try to another one.
Maybe reload your PowerPoint application.
Okay,
yeah,
just a
because
second.
For some reason a little segment is invisible. Thank you.
Just a second.
Sorry. Wonderful. Now it's much better. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Amazing. Okay. Here, this slide depicts the fragment of the constitution of the Polish Ecumenical Council. Now, in its emblematic definition, Polish Ecumenical Council declared its activity as aimed, I start the quotation, as aimed at developing ecumenical dialogue, religious tolerance, and coming together and cultivation of fraternal relations between churches. Then, according to the status of the Council, one might distinguish following targets. First, religious tolerance, ecumenical awareness, common programs and studies on ecumenical issues, common ecumenical institutions, promotion of publishing and information activities, ecumenical relationships with churches, and ecumenical organizations from all around the world, human rights, international internal peace, humanitarian aid, integrity of creation, interchurch conflicts. So, as we could see, the agenda of the Polish Ecumenical Council is similar and converging with the agenda of the ecumenical movement in the global perspective. And so the Polish Ecumenical Council is somehow reflecting what is going on in the global ecumenism. Now, the next point of this first part of the presentation is a short presentation, short outline of the ecumenical initiatives and ecumenism of the Polish Roman Catholic Church, or better to say, Roman Catholic Church in Poland. Obviously, still, the ecumenical opening, official ecumenical opening, is related to the Second Vatican Council. Yet still one can indicate some pre-ecumenical initiatives of particular individual theologians and churchmen. For instance, I think we must mention such theologians as Bogusław Waczyński or Jan Urban, excuse me. Jan Urban, for instance, may be regarded as a precursor of ecumenical attitudes in Poland. However, his ecumenical approach was referred to the Orthodox Church and only without any reference to the Protestantism. But still, Urban was a redactor-in-chief of the theological journal entitled Oriens, where he presented his thinking towards Orthodox churches. He claimed that unity, and that now I would like to quote him, I start a quotation, "Unity is not possible where sides do not know themselves, where they are adverse to each other due to mutual hostility." End of quotation. Also brief before the beginning of the Second Vatican Council, some enthusiasts of ecumenism in Poland founded in 1961 the so-called ecumenical section of the Pastoral Studium in Warsaw, just in order to organize lectures on ecumenical worship, ecumenism in general, ecumenical theology, and also to organize ecumenical worships. And in the result, the section formed a circle involved in the promotion of the ecumenical idea. Since January 1962, the Roman Catholic Church began to organize the worship on the week of prayer for Christian unity. So some reactions of the Polish Ecumenical Council were rather reserved. This ecumenical involvement of the Roman Catholic Church was more and more intensive. And for instance, on the 1st October 1962, Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński founded the body of which name was the Center for Christian Unity in Warsaw, of which first director has been nominated the then rector of the Warsaw Metropolitan Seminary, Władysław Miziołek, one of the pioneers of Polish ecumenism. The very first task of this institution was organizing ecumenical structures in Poland within the Roman Catholic Church in Poland and relationships with the non-Catholic Christians in Poland. The special place in the proliferation of ecumenical idea within the Catholic Church in Poland has been taken by the retreat house of the Franciscan Sisters, Servants of the Cross in Laski in the outskirts of Warsaw. And for instance, in the years 1963-1971, the center organized theological conferences on ecumenical issues for priests and for students. Since 1964, and also an ecumenical retreat for clergy persons has been held with the participation of various non-Catholic Christians. There is also a very interesting story about another, let's say, activity of the center, of the retreat house of the Franciscan Sisters. Namely, they organized the meetings of the Lutheran priests from West Germany and Eastern Germany. The meetings were organized by the Anglican priest Christopher Lowe, who prepared these meetings of German priests, of Lutheran priests in Warsaw, because of course it was impossible to meet somewhere in Germany. So this is really interesting story. I think this should be somehow also presented, or perhaps historic scrutiny should be done on this topic. Then, 1965 in Warsaw, the Polish Bishop Conference elected a committee for ecumenism consisting of 8 theologians. And then 1 year later, this body was transformed into the Commission of the Polish Bishop Conference. Finally, in 1996, this commission was transformed into the Council of the Polish Bishop Conference for Ecumenism, and now this council is acting, and since 2021, his chairman is Reverend Bishop Jacek Jezierski, Bishop of Elbląg. The Polish Bishop Conference also strives to establish relationships with the Polish Ecumenical Council. And here, the first attempts of cooperation brought relatively modern outcomes, let's say mainly because of the Catholic Church intentionally omitted the Polish Catholic Church. So now, in order to be clear, the Roman Catholic Church in Poland omitted the Polish Catholic Church of Old Catholic tradition and Old Catholic Mariavite Church when invited, for instance, for the week for prayer for Christian unity. And only when all member churches of the Polish Ecumenical Council were invited in 1971, the council, so the Ecumenical Council, accepted the invitation of the Roman Catholic Church in Poland. At this time, it started to be a common practice that representatives of member churches of the Polish Ecumenical Council preach in the Catholic churches and conversely. Now I have to say that since 2 or 3 years, unfortunately, this practice is, let's say, shrinking. And for instance, in Lublin, while the week for prayer for Christian unity, guests invited from different non-Catholic churches have a so-called Christian witness after the end of the or in the end of the Mass. Now, in January 1974, the Polish Ecumenical Council established and Roman Catholic Church in Poland established the mixed commission for relationships between the Roman Catholic Church in Poland and the Polish Ecumenical Council. In 1977, the Council founded the subcommission for the doctrinal dialogue, which initiated dialogues with individual member churches of the Polish Ecumenical Council on different questions, different topics, as for instance, concerning baptism, common baptism, or mixed marriages, and so on. Achievements of the Council, let's list them. This is, for instance, support in the organization of diocesan chapters for ecumenism and ecumenical circles, the teaching program in ecumenism in Poland, in Polish seminaries and Catholic universities, faculties of theology, support in the education of experts in ecumenical theology, also ecumenical handbook published in 1997 by the Ecumenical Institute of the Catholic University in Lublin, annual meeting of ecumenical referents and experts, preparations of the materials for the week of prayer for Christian unity, a bulletin, ecumenical bulletin, which is published quarterly. The bulletin provides with different informations about ecumenical activities and news from the ecumenical movement in his global perspective. The Council also participated in organization of I think the largest until now ecumenical events as European Ecumenical Assemblies in Basel in 1989, Graz 1997, and Sibiu in Romania 2006. Sorry. Finally, it contributed to the document, to the publishing of the documents on the joint agreement on mutual recognition of baptism and on mixed marriages. Okay, now this there are the slides with presenting the Polish Bishop Conference now. I would like to start the second chapter of the presentation. So, ecumenical achievements in Poland. Obviously, ecumenical dialogue in Poland refers to many different topics, many different aspects. But I think in order to present the main achievements, the most important achievements, we have to emphasize, we have to stress 4 particular questions. First, this is a mutual recognizing of baptism. Second, interconfessional marriages. Third, integrity of creation. And 4, preservation of Sunday. So, concerning the first achievement.
Yes, Piotr, yes. Just a kind of reminder about the time.
I'm sorry. So, okay,
yeah,
so
if you can also, yes.
Okay, sorry. So just okay, only I will list only this 4 achievements, 4 documents very important for the ecumenism in Poland, but not only in Poland, but also for the, let's say, global ecumenism. So both main ecumenical players in Poland, so the Polish Ecumenical Council and Roman Catholic Church signed 4 documents. The first one is the document on mutual recognizing of baptism. Second important document was document of interconfessional marriages, which is now waiting for the recognizing in Vatican. Third one is the document on the preservation of Sunday. Also, the document which is, I think, a great and large ecumenical success and achievement, and also the document on the integrity of creation. But okay, so taking in account the time and the lack of the time, I will start the last and the most important topic and the conclusion. So, ecumenical contribution to the Polish-German reconciliation. So, yes, now I think the topic is larger than and required more than 1 or 2 hours of lecture, but still, in order to just to outline this contribution, I think we have to start with the premises or assumption that one may risk an opinion that without Christian and ecumenical contribution, reconciliation and peace between Poland and Germany would not be possible, or would be slower and more shallow, at least. So without this contribution. This was the case, the relationships between Poland and Germany after the Second War was the case when the ecumenical idea and ecumenical attitudes influenced whole societies, and individual leaders changed the course of history. And now I think obviously there is much to do in the relationships between both nations. But still, when thinking about the history, especially of the 20th century, and feeling of harm imposed on the relationships between both nations, this reconciliation appears as miracle. And firstly, one may mention some institutions and organizations that are, let's say, sheerly ecumenical and work for religious, political, cultural, and social reconciliation and understanding between nations. Then I would say something about the leaders of ecumenism in Poland who contributed to the reconciliation between Poland and Germany. So now we divide this this topic in 2 subsections, let's say. So first, the organization. So just listing them. First one is the signs of hope. And this is the Evangelical and the Ecumenical project, of which the main purpose is involvement for the Polish-German reconciliation. And the signs of hope presents itself by the motto, so I will quote, so starting quotation, for the better future for Poland and Germany, and by the goals, purposes, to save remembrances, to forget harms, to learn from history, and to shape a better future. This organization, this group was founded in 1977. Then, next ecumenical organization or ecumenical body, the Polish-German Cooperation of Youth. It was, let's say, the first Polish-German organization of the legal entity or legal personality. And this project was funded in 1991 by both governments, Polish and German, as an international agreement. And this organization finances different encounters, programs, projects, and so on, in which young people from both countries could participate. And still, the main purpose of the cooperation is to increase common understanding, overcome prejudices, and support reconciliation between Poland and Germany. Now, next ecumenical institution, which is well known, of course. So, of course, I am thinking about the reconciliation in Europe, the task of churches in Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, and Germany. I think there is no point to present this organization in more details, so I will skip it. And now I would say something which is, let's say, even more interesting about the leaders of reconciliation. Obviously, this list is long. I would like to mention just a couple of persons. Now, we also have to introduce into this presentation by claiming that this reconciliation between Poland and Germany would be impossible without some leaders who strive for mutual forgivenesses. And here, for instance, this is proved, for instance, by the history of the so-called Easter Memorandum and of the letter of the Polish episcopacy to the German bishops, the letter, this famous letter, we forgive and ask for forgiveness. This first document was declared to be, and I quote now the Archbishop Henryk Muszyński, another leader of the Polish-German reconciliation. So I start the quotation: the most important document of the Polish-German reconciliation. So the Easter Memorandum. Concerning the history of Easter Memorandum, just very briefly, in the 1st October 1965, Evangelical Church in Germany released a document entitled "The Situation of," this is the whole title, "The Situation of Expelled People and the Relationship of the German Nation to its Eastern Neighbors, Evangelical Memorandum," end of title. The main purpose of the document was to make conditions for an agreement between Poland and Germany after decades of suffering. In this memorandum, Evangelische Kirche Deutschland took a position toward the German claims and the former German regions. On the one hand, the authors of the document regretted and the sufferings and injustice met those who were expelled from their houses. On the other hand, they recommended acknowledgement of rights of the Polish people who went or who were expelled from the Soviet Union to live in these regions. In other words, the signatories of the document of the Easter Memorandum accepted the borders between Poland and Germany. And it must be emphasized that, like the Stuttgart Declaration of Guilt, so the document from the 1946, this document also caused public indignation of these authors. The response of Polish bishops was that 18 November 1965, during the session of the Second Vatican Council, the Polish bishops sent to all episcopacies letters of invitation for the celebration of the millennium of the baptism in Poland. A very exceptional letter has been sent to the German episcopacy. This document, this letter to German episcopacy, was officially entitled, now I start this official title, "The Message of the Polish Bishops to their German Brothers in Christ's Pastoral Office," end of title. And in history is labeled by the expression "we forgive and ask for forgiveness." And here I would like to quote one more time Archbishop Henryk Muszyński, who stated that, start quotation, this phrase brought up to the peoples and the believers of churches living in Poland and Germany blessed fruits, which were the foundations for other Polish-German relations. Therefore, it is not strange that many historians now consider this message of Polish bishops as the most important document of the post-war period. Archbishop Henryk Muszyński wrote these words in one of his articles. The main inspirator of the letter was the Archbishop of Wrocław, Bolesław Kominek. The letter scrutinized the centuries of the Polish-German relationships and contained this famous phrase about forgiveness in the conclusion of the letter. Also, this letter in Poland caused public indignation and misunderstanding within the Polish society. I refer to this famous story, to these famous two documents, because the history of these documents also reveals somehow the role played by the leaders of ecumenism. And one of these leaders of ecumenism in Poland is Archbishop Nosor, Archbishop Alphonse Nosor, Archbishop of Opole, of the Diocese of Opole in Upper Silesia. One of the key leaders, Archbishop Nosor, he is one of the key leaders of the Polish-German reconciliation and also one of the most influential leaders of the Polish ecumenism. He is also the Polish hierarchy who confessed officially that, I quote, "Meine Muttersprache ist Deutsch," end of quotation. He was also long-standing president of the Commission for Dialogue between Polish Bishop Conference and the Polish Ecumenical Council, the long-standing president of the Council for Ecumenism of the Polish Bishop Conference, the member of the International Ecumenical Catholic Lutheran Dialogue, the founder of the Ecumenical Institute of the Catholic University in Lublin, the founder of the University of Opole. The list of his achievements is much, much longer. In the biography of the Archbishop, there is many points which predestined him to be an agent of reconciliation. The place of his birth in Upper Silesia, the studies in the Catholic University in Lublin, the close friendship with Pope John Paul II and Cardinal Walter Kasper, so the former president of the Papal Council for the Promoting for Christian Unity. And now his biography is also very interesting because of the fact from his studies in the Catholic University in Lublin. Namely, he was asked by the then rector of the Catholic University in Lublin, Reverend Professor Vincente Granat, who prepared that time his famous handbook for the Catholic dogmatics. So the rector invited then student Alphonse Nosor to prepare the Christological the chapter on the Christology from the Protestant perspective. In order to address this invitation, Archbishop Nosor contacted many theologians from Western Germany, of whom many later went to Lublin, to Opole, to Nysa, and of whom many later were involved in this famous Easter Memorandum. So I think this is also a substantial contribution of Archbishop Nosor to the reconciliation between Poland and Germany. Also, we have to remind the famous Mass celebrated in Krzyżowa, Krajza, in Lower Silesia, the Mass in which participated both Helmut Kohl and the then Prime Minister of the Polish government, Tadeusz Mazowiecki. The Mass passed to the history under the name of the Mass of Reconciliation. Archbishop Nosor was Archbishop Nosor was, here we have his picture. Archbishop Nosal was one of the main celebrants of the worship. And the crucial moment of the Mass was the sign of peace during the Mass, given to each other by both political leaders. Archbishop Nosal, when interviewed, explained how many difficulties he must have must have been overcome to make this gesture. Archbishop Nosal was asked to omit this gesture. And every time when he was asked, he explained and he answered that he must respect the order of the Holy Mass, and that's all. Also, another important agent, let's say, and pioneer of reconciliation is Hanna Moraska. Hanna Moraska, she was one of the first pioneers of reconciliation on the theological level. Hanna Moraska wrote famous biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer entitled Christian in the Third Reich in the 1916s, and then contributed to the growing interest in the matter of German-Polish relationships in Poland. Also important was the circle of the journal Tygodnik Powszechny, especially two persons like Hanna Malewska and Halina Bortnowska. Both Anna Malewska and Halina Bortnowska were involved in the Aktion Sinnenzeichen Friedensdienste. But still, in the very beginning, this activity and these initiatives were relied rather on the personal, individual relationships between Germans and Poles. There were letters exchanged, private encounters, and here on the Polish side, one of the most important was the circle of the Tygodnik Powszechny, so one of the crucial, one of the essential Catholic journal during the time of communism in Poland. And this regular cooperation between this group, Aktion Sinnenzeichen Friedensliste, and the Polish groups and projects have started in 19th, and here we could mention many initiatives, but I think this is no point to enter into more detailed story. So now I would like only to make to show the rest of the slide, because during the while lecturing I forgot about it. So here is another one, again, the picture of the Archbishop Nosal, taken in Kamień Śląski in his room. Here is the picture of Cardinal Bolesław Kominek, so the man, the author of the letter of the Polish Bishop Conference, we ask and forgiveness.
Piotr, if you can slowly get into conclusion, yes?
Okay, so
still need
now
to
the
have
conclusion
a response,
is,
and I would like to leave a bit of time for discussion.
Definitely,
thank you.
Definitely. The conclusion, so instead of conclusion, and I would like to one more time stress that first, reconciliation between Poland and Germany and the contribution of Christians, especially in ecumenical perspective, is essential. So without this contribution, I think the reconciliation would not be possible, or at least slower and more shallow. Second point, in this reconciliation, important role played individual persons. So the matter of reconciliation was the matter of individuals and small groups involved in the ecumenical movement in the Polish perspective, in Polish dimension. So these two important remarks, I think, are the conclusion of the presentation. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much, Piotr. I will announce a little bit later that Piotr will come to Lviv to speak about Polish-German reconciliation at a conference. So there he can probably share everything he didn't manage to tell us today. I will tell you about this conference at the very end of our meeting.
Apologize for such a long presentation. I really sorry. I forgot about time.
Yeah, no worries. You convinced us that there is much more to dig into. So thank you. And I would like to now to invite Bishop Pavlo Schwartz with his response to Piotr's paper. Bishop, please.
Насамперед хочу подякувати за змістовну презентацію.
First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for the wonderful and consistent presentation. I read it all through. That's why I know what have been missed. And I also do hope that it will be mentioned when Piotr Kopiec comes over to Lviv. I would like to specify how many minutes do I have for my reaction so that I would stick to that timing. If possible, 10 minutes, that would be ideal. That would be great. And we have consecutive translation, so there is no need for you to make pauses. I would like to react to ecumenism in Poland, of which I know a little bit. I used to live in Poland for 8 years. I studied there. I also was a servant in the church. Of course, when we talk about different ecumenical events that helped us to reconcile different groups, different nations, it does not mean that this process was easy. And there were a couple of moments mentioned during this presentation that the problems did exist. And even Archbishop was consulted to omit an element, an inalienable element of the Mass, because the pain that people felt in their hearts was bigger than the desire to outreach with open hands. And the same is true for Germany after war. It's not only the problems that have been already promulgated, but also interconfessional problems. One problem was mentioned already. It's migration to the former German territories, former German terrains of the people who lived in contemporary Ukrainian territories. This also contributed to the tensions, not only inter-ethnic, but also inter-confessional, because one of the territories was Uniate or Lutheran, and then they suddenly became Catholic, as it is today. So at times that contributed to tension. And I think this tension lasted up to the 1990s. It's not an easy process. And unfortunately, nice processes of reconciliation not necessarily always come. Reconciliation was not only about Lutherans and Catholics, but also there was tension between Protestants, between Lutherans and Methodists. It's still being solved. Tensions between Orthodox Church and Greek Catholic Church, especially due to the migrational processes and lack of pastoral the pastoral care that Greek Catholic Church was given to people who found themselves on the new territories. So this is the process that lasted for a long time, and in some cases still continues to last. But owing to this titanic work of ecumenical attempts and desire to reconcile and live together, a lot of things have been achieved. And of course, in the context of international reconciliation, the experience of Poland and Germany is unique, although it's not the first one. I think the first reconciliation was between Germany and France, if I'm not mistaken. But interconfessional and religious experience probably is more unique in Poland. And what was mentioned, and I find it significant, this legendary phrase, "We forgive and ask for forgiveness." This is the phrase that was greatly unpopular at that time. Priests, bishops who were saying this on the Polish side and on the German side, both Catholic and Lutheran, they would hear in response from average parishioners that they are betrayers because they speak about things that do hurt and they won't let it go. And the process of healing from this was quite long. But owing to the fact that both churches were quite consistent and coherent in this respect, they succeeded. And I think this is the kind of experience we can use in Ukrainian context, because to expect when we start talking about our borderline traumas, our new traumas, although it's quite tough to talk about the new traumas if they are still in the active phase. But we have so many traumatic experiences in Ukraine that are related to ethnic groups, religious groups that we can talk about. The difference between Ukraine and Poland is huge because we are an interconfessional, interreligious, inter-ethnic community. And that's why this gives us an opportunity to start many dialogues, at least to launch the process of reconciliation, or at least start talking about this, in order not to repeat what was in history, because at school we are taught two extremes, that either our nation and representatives of the church are a victim or are heroes. And history is much more complicated, as we see. And only when we look straight into ourselves, into our heart, can we start the dialogue. When it comes to ecumenism in Ukrainian context, I have to say that ecumenical work and interreligious work is formed in a different way, and it's a huge success of Ukraine that we have Church Council, National Church Council of Churches. But Polish experience is also very significant. 4 things: baptism. This situation is not defined even within the traditional Christian confessions about the recognition of baptism between Orthodox, Greek Catholics, and Protestants. It is not accepted, and there have been many cases where people were baptized for the second time because the first baptism was not accepted. The mixed marriage situation is also waiting for improvement. So if in that case, they are still waiting for the approval of, for us, it's something absolutely new. Environmental issues are much better. But so far, I haven't heard about some shared document. Maybe it exists, but I don't know about it. The idea of Sunday is also the wonderful thing, the preservation of Sunday. I think that the Polish side shows that despite the outside world where consumption prevails, we can still stand for our religious convictions, to have a freely celebrated day off, and also to protect people from working on that day. I think for our state, that would be quite popular and interesting. And as far as Ukraine concerned, I can add that our reconciliation group, to which I belong, from the Lutheran Church of Ukraine, we are going to organize a conference next year in Ukraine. We will have first a working meeting in May, and then for autumn, we plan a whole conference in post-pandemic world. I hope it will be already a post-pandemic world, but it's difficult to make prognosis as of today. And we can see that despite the fact that many topics have been already raised, for instance, in 2014, we were talking about Polish-Ukrainian conflict in Warsaw. We were talking about the Volyn events. At that time, it was not emotional, but in a couple of years, this topic again became very emotional, at least in Poland. So again, this old wound was revived, and it was again brought back to discussions. I mean, the tragedy that took place in Volyn. This is telling us that the story of reconciliation requires a lot of efforts. It's not enough to have just one public event. It requires healing. So Poland can be here a good example for this. If not churches, then who is supposed to give the example of forgiveness and asking for forgiveness? This is, if to be brief, to stick to the principle of 10 minutes. So this is my concise reaction. Thank you for your topic and for your presentation in general. Thank you, Bishop Pavlo, for your ideas, for your reactions, and for your projection of what was said by Piotr, projecting it onto the Ukrainian context. We ran out of time, but my colleagues are prompting me that we can still have 13 minutes for discussion and then just 1 minute for announcement. If there are questions from the audience, please do ask them. You can either write in the chat or you may raise your hand and speak up. So far, we have got 3 questions that were asked during the registration, and I will be reading them out loud. I will start before we have some hands raised and some comments. Maybe I will copy-paste them into our chat so that our speakers could see them. So the first question comes from Nazarevich Lesya. In which way Christian organizations can favor or foster the solution of questions of mutual understanding in such issues of historical injustice as Holocaust, genocide, and others? So how Christian organizations can help to solve these issues? Is there any Christian, especially Christian approach, how to deal with historical heritage, historical memory? So I invite both you, Piotr, and you, Bishop Pavlo, to comment or respond.
Okay, so as far as I understood the question, there are, of course, many ways of interpretation of history, and I would like to refer to the so-called culture of remembrance, so Erinnerung Kultur. The approach developed by many historians or sociologians in Germany, now in Poland, in the Netherlands. So the Erinnerung Kultur, so the culture of remembrance, from the theological perspective, try to explain how we have to interpret history from the Christian point of view in order to change this history into the common theological and let's say Christian experience. So, for instance, one of my friends from Germany, Gerd Franzenburg, who I think will be one of the participants of the future conference in Lviv, take part in, or not only take part, but he is a leader of the group of the culture of, so group which develop different projects within the culture of remembrance. And for instance, he also makes historical scrutiny on the processes of expelling of people from former German regions to the Western Germany, and stressed the role which played Lutheran pastors, Lutheran ministers, while the process of coming, searching new houses, new places for life, simply in the Western Germany. So I think this is a very good example of how we use theology and Christian experiences, Christian beliefs, in order to interpret history in a Christian way. So not only stress the divisions, stress the sufferings, stress not only to stress what divide us, but stress the common experiences and the common approach to these experiences from the Christian point of view. I think perhaps this sounds a little bit complicated, but I would like to attract and to send to the theory of the culture of remembrance, which gives many, I think, many new sparks, also new outlooks for the Christian perspective, Christian approach to history.
Дуже дякую, Piotr.
Thank you very much, Piotr. Our next question comes from Halina Theodorovich. Where do you have the source of inspiration to talk about peace building under the circumstances of rampant and ever-escalating tension, hatred, and violence and wars in the world? So where do you take inspiration? What is the source of your inspiration of talking about peace building? And perhaps I will read the next question. Let's try to do two in one. It comes from Lada Kanevska. It would be interesting to find out more about the activity of International Ecumenical Group Reconciliation and what are its plans for the nearest 5 years. Which shadows, or by shadow I mean the dark side of a personality, so which shadows in perceiving different situations by people have impressed you most of all in the recent years? And the last question, with which groups in Ukraine do you interact? Because we are involved in many dialogue processes in Ukraine and with the neighboring countries, but we have never interacted so far with you. So maybe both of you can react to this. I may start very briefly. Where do I take inspiration for talking about peace building? Well, very brief answer. That's the essence of Christianity, to bring peace, to ask forgiveness, and to forgive. And this is the inspiration, my relations with God. Regarding the question about the reconciliation, the maximum amount of materials you can find about the Ecumenical Group Reconciliation, you can find in the website of Polish Ecumenical Council. That's probably the broadest set of information. So I invite you to enter the site. There are no plans for the nearest 5 years because the dynamics of topics gives us opportunity to plan for the nearest 2 years, because the relations between two societies are very interactive and very rapidly developed. So if we make a plan for 5 years, we risk to get out of date before the end of the 5th year. The last question I didn't get to the end, so there are very different people. Well, in terms who impressed me a lot, I don't know who impressed me more by the shadowness of his or her life. With whom do we work in Ukraine? Roman Catholic Church, Greek Catholic Church, German Lutheran Church of Ukraine, and Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate. These are 4 representatives in the group. And approximately the same groups exist in other countries. But we also from time to time cooperate with other religious representatives. Oh, and also with NGOs.
Так, професор Kopiec, чи нам до інших питань переходити, чи ви хочете щось?
Professor Kopiec, would you like to react, or shall we proceed with other questions?
He is an expert, and so I have nothing to add. And thank you for his answer. Concerning one of these questions, I don't remember exactly but the question about inspirations for the ecumenical work, and obviously this is gospel. This is being Christian is also calling to act for reconciliation everywhere and every time. And I would like to outline a short story from the very beginning of the historical movement. Namely, in 1921 in Geneva was being held the first preparatory meeting of the Faith and Order movement, so one of the first ecumenical organization. And in the first section, the first day of this meeting, delegates from France and delegates from Germany struggled, and the conflict was because the delegates from France announced said that they sorry excuse me, they would not sit in one table and across one table with the delegates from Germany unless the delegates from Germany confess their guilt for the war. So the conflicts between these two groups raised, and in one moment, one delegate from the Waldensian Church from Italy said that he lost in this war his only son, but now he asked all participants of these meetings to stand and to say together, "Our Father," with putting stress on the words, and the words obviously, those who trespass against us. So, according to historians of the ecumenical movement, this gesture of this Waldensian from Italy saved the ecumenical movement, saved the story of the ecumenical movement for the future generation.
Yes, дуже дякую, Piotr. Зараз
Thank you very much, Piotr. Since our time is up, we are talking about the God's creation, but the time was created in such way that we cannot make it longer and we cannot prolong it. Nevertheless, I am offering the following. We've got 2 questions in our chat. I will read them out loud, and then we will ask maybe to give a quick reply to Alexander Kushta and Mr. Konstantin Sihov for 30 seconds, not more. And Roman Fihas also, if you wish, you can ask something. And then we will ask to react briefly. So, question from Luc Forestier from Paris. Thank you for the presentation and the answer. I wonder about reception of such reconciliation within the communities. Bishop Schwartz spoke about violent reactions. How is it possible to elaborate process of reconciliation thinking, at the same time about reception, so that this reconciliation would be received adequately at the level of the grassroots. And there is another question that was sent to me in private format, and I resent it to the general chat. It's the question about whether there are divisions between within the Polish Bishops' Conference, and how to deepen the dialogue. Now I pass the floor to Reverend Alexander Kushta and Mr. Konstantin Sigov very briefly, and then I will pass the floor to Pavlo Schwartz and Piotr Kopiec. Glory to Jesus Christ. Glory be forever, yes. If you can switch on your camera, that would be great. For some reason, it's not switching on, but the voice you can hear. Okay, go on. I would like to ask a question both to Professor Kopiec and Bishop Pavlo Schwartz. The question is the following. I'm still trying to switch on my camera. Okay, then continue with your question, please, because we are really, really short of time. Please continue. The so-called exorcination of history from certain accumulation of stereotypes regarding different religions. Does this exorcisation of the past play an important role? I mean, the dialogues between Muslims, Jews, Christians, and different nationalities. And in this case, I would like to specify what I mean. There are two models of so-called ecumenical dialogue. One is Iranism, that is coming to peace at the cost of certain rights, and there is the second way expressed by Pope Benedictus XVI, that unity is born due to truth. When we sit down at the table and Jesus tells us, come to know the truth and the truth will set you free. The second question is addressed to Bishop Pavlo Schwartz, since he is member of the Council of the Churches. Isn't it high time to create in Ukraine an ecumenical Council of Churches in Ukraine, because we have a national Council of Churches, but it plays a technical role, like signing different mutual documents, but ecumenical movement is much broader and it touches a different set of issues. So if Bishop Pavlo Schwartz touched the question of the site of the ecumenical, Polish ecumenical site, we can see how many achievements they have, and leaving alone the World Council of Churches. What about Ukraine? Thank you very much. Very interesting questions. Mr. Konstantin Sigov, the floor is yours. Glory to Jesus Christ. Thank you for giving opportunity to speak and to express my gratitude to all the participants of this significant event. I think it echoes the dialogue that has been taking place in Collège de Debardane in Paris, that was organized by Antoine Arjakovsky, pertaining to the future of Europe, where 27 countries of the European Union take place. We know that France will be leading, will be heading in EU. A question is, how can churches participate in this discussion of the future of Europe? Because the issues of reconciliation and peace building without the churches is not possible, especially now when we have 7 years of war in Europe and other conflicts. I don't hear Ukraine discussing this topic of the future of Europe. Probably Poland, for Poland it's different because Poland is part of EU. Germany is also following Ursula von der Leyen and others. So the question of churches and the future of Europe and our voices in this discussion in future. Thank you very much. Indeed, significant issues. And I'm sure that your competences make it possible to answer these questions. So we have the reception of reconciliation on the grassroots, true ecumenism in Ukraine, genuine ecumenism in Ukraine, not just dialogue between religions and government. And the third question, churches and Europe. Please.
So perhaps I would start. So concerning the questions of Professor Alexandre, in the Catholic ecumenical principle, so the Christian ecumenism define the principles of ecumenism, and one of these principles is to avoid the so-called false Irenism. So now, while entering into dialogue, the very first premises, the very first assumption of entering into dialogue is to honest presentation of the official teaching of the church, which is represented. So I am certain, even as I have a small experience in ecumenical dialogue, taking part in various ecumenical organizations between organizations which are consisted of many Christian denominations. So I would say that this premise, this condition, is the conditio sine qua non of being of the ecumenical effectiveness, let's say. So I think the ecumenical theory, especially theory which is also presented or defined by the both ecumenical decree and ecumenism of the Second Vatican Council, and then the so-called ecumenical directories published by the Pontifical Council for Christian Unity, or important and necessary also sources of how to practice and how to exercise ecumenical dialogue, ecumenical relationships in general.
Дякую. Так, єпископе Павле.
Thank you very much, Bishop Pavlo. I will try to be as brief as possible. So briefly about everything. When it comes to practice, so the first question written in the chat. The answer is very simple and complicated at the same time. How to help people, how to make this reconciliation part of the whole church. First, it has to be preached. It has to be talked about. It has to be lived by. And we need to have a realistic look that the process of reconciliation and forgiveness, because reconciliation and forgiveness are different processes. Forgiveness, it is something that we are obliged to do as Christians, and reconciliation is the ideal we have to aspire, and both sides should aspire. But we need to understand that in the Ukrainian context, I keep saying all the time, it's difficult for us to ask forgiveness and to forgive culturally because we don't have great patterns for imitation among our politicians who would confess of their mistakes. And even in the church surrounding, we have problem with this because we are educated, we are fostered, we are brought up in the culture of great leaders, and great leaders are not the ones who recognize mistakes and ask for forgiveness. This is what we've been taught. And if to speak about the Evangelical Church, how it treats and what is its attitude to ecumenism, it's another lecture, it's a whole lecture. When it comes to Poland, it's difficult to say. In Poland, perhaps there are different structures that deal both with ecumenism and interreligious dialogue. These are different things. I think in the Catholic churches, it's there, but in Protestant churches, depending on the situation. What about the Ecumenical Council of Churches? The National Council of Churches, those members that are already there, if they want to do something together, they do it. The example was today's event. That is yesterday's event, today's event, a couple of events in the recent days, and they were organized. Dubbing the structure in Ukraine, I'm not sure it will bring results, but I understand that there are churches that remain beyond this communication, and we need to outreach. So far, I'm not sure, I'm not convinced it's possible to create such ecumenical council. In the context of Poland, I will specify not all the churches are members, only 7 churches are members of this council, as far as I remember. Regarding the question asked by Konstantin Sigov, how can churches join the discussion of the future of Europe? As for today, in the church, in the ecclesiastic context, there are 2 organizations that are represented robustly in Europe. This is the Conference of Catholic Bishops of Europe, and the second, the Organization of Orthodox and Protestants. It's the Conference of the Churches of Europe. These 2 structures. Why Ukraine is not heard there? Because the second organization does not have any representatives from Ukraine. It's the only church that is represented representing Ukraine is the Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate. So we are planning to enter this organization as a separate representative. We are just now as a union of churches of the former Soviet Union. The more churches join this body, the more dialogue and conversation will be there. And by the way, 2 or 1 years ago, I had a meeting in Paris dedicated to the topic of reconciliation. That's briefly to your question. Thank you very much. We are closing. I want to express gratitude to Professor Kopiec and Bishop Pavlo Schwartz for their in-depth presentation and comments. I also want to express my gratitude to our technical support, Oleg Vanyo, and the interpreter, Halina Pastushuk. Also, I extend my gratitude to Irina Kitura from the Institute of Ecumenical Studies, who is really keeping this project on her shoulders. And I want to extend gratitude to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, who is partner in this event. And I extend my gratitude to all of you who've been with us. And I heartily invite you to our upcoming 4 webinars that will pertain to the issues of Balkans, Lebanon, Israel-Palestinian conflict, and Northern Ireland. And the last thing, I would like to invite you to 2 events. The first one will take place tomorrow in English. It's a seminar, The Primacy of Catholicism and the World Governance. We will have 2 reports, Luc Forestier from Paris and mine, how politics and ecclesiology interact. So the power in the church, how they imitate each other, church and power. And the second event that I have mentioned already, it's the conference about Polish-German reconciliation. It will last for 2 days, 25th, 26th of November this year in hybrid format. I will give you the links in the chat, and you need to copy-paste them as quickly as possible because they will disappear. So thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you in the nearest future. Thank you very much and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Okay. Dziękuję bardzo, Piotr.
Dziękuję bardzo, Paweł. Dziękuję. Дуже dziękuję.
We have, I think, shown the interest for the Polish-German reconciliation and probably will have more attendances at our event in November.
Pavlo, and concerning, because I know, concerning we just discussed in April or
yes.
in March, you're coming to Lublin. So I don't know how it is now concerning also the pandemic situation in Ukraine, in Poland. Now we still or from the 3rd of November till 12th of November, we are on the distance learning only, not even hybrid, but by distance learning. But hopefully we will return to a hybrid way of working in the middle of November. So because
can we have a chat maybe on this, like one of the coming days? Can we speak?
Yes, definitely,
next week?
Definitely.
Let's have a short Skype conversation and then see the date.
Okay.
And
so Pavlo, so perhaps in the end of the next week, because the first part I will be in Romania, but I will be back on Thursday, and so then Friday, Saturday, or okay.
Wonderful.
So
let's try maybe next Friday. Okay.
Super. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Okay. Bye. I have to go. Bye.
Я думаю, що це вже можна завершити ту зустріч.